Did I work?
Yes, correct.
What if I told you that we are living in a birdcage when we could be flying across the open sky? That we are swimming in a fish tank when we could be exploring the wonders of the ocean? And that we are choosing a single flavor of ice cream when there are thousands to choose from? We could even invent our own ice cream flavor if we wanted to. But the reason why we don't escape the birdcage, and the reason why we don't jump out of the fish tank, and the reason that we opt for the same flavor of ice cream every single time is simple. We are experiencing a crisis of imagination. Most of the world's biggest problems are not economic, political, or even environmental. They come from our inability to imagine a future that is different to the current reality. They come from a crisis of imagination. In the next 10 minutes, I'm going to be sharing with you how we can escape this crisis of imagination and hopefully invent our own ice cream flavors. I'm sure everyone would want to know how ice cream can be invented. But first, I want to share a story with you, and I want to share a secret with you. Most people think that there's only one reality, the physical reality, like the chair that you're currently sitting on, or gravity. If it wasn't for gravity, we would all be floating in the air right now. And I personally think that TEDx talks would be much more fun if we were all floating. And also people, I'm pretty sure everyone here is real. If anyone has any doubts, you have permission to poke the person next to you, just to make sure. Okay, I'm glad you did that. But there's also another reality, which is equally as real, but we rarely talk about, and that is an imagined reality. Imagination is a uniquely human capacity. In fact, we are the only species that's able to voluntarily imagine things that don't exist. The pyramids didn't exist until the ancient Egyptians imagined them into reality. Money didn't exist and doesn't even have any inherent value. It's just a piece of paper or a bunch of digits, but we have imagined a whole world around generating more money. And music, we've already listened to some music today. The music we listen to has been composed, produced, and improvised using human imagination. We tend to think of imagination as the opposite of reality. But the truth is, imagination creates reality. Much of human progress has come from our collective ability to imagine new worlds and possibilities. But somehow, somewhere along the line, we decided to believe that the world is physical, fixed, and inflexible, almost like a rock, that we can't move it. But why is that? Why do we have a crisis of imagination? When we are kids, we actually have the opposite. We have an abundance of imagination. We are full of wonder and curiosity, and we love asking questions. I remember when I was a kid, I couldn't stop asking questions. Both my parents are in the room today, and I'm sure if you ask them, they'll tell you that it was probably cute to begin with, but as I asked more questions, it became more annoying. But they endured, and they did their best to answer my questions. But by the time I went to school, I started getting into trouble because I was asking too many questions and thinking about ideas that were outside of the curriculum. Years later, I realized that all of us have the ability to imagine. But when we start going to school and then eventually enter the workforce, we learn the rules but lose our sense of wonder and imagination. In other words, our imaginations start to shrink. The second reason for the crisis of imagination is consumerism. Our current economic model prioritizes the production and consumption of goods and services above everything else. Progress is measured through the lens of increasing levels of consumption. And as a result, we become passive consumers of content, products, and reality, rather than active participants, makers, and creators of reality. We start to believe that the world cannot be changed and that we can't change the physical world using our imagination. The difference between a passive consumer and an active participant is like the difference between watching a movie on Netflix and being an actor in theatre, or watching a football match on TV and playing football in the park. The truth is, the more we consume, the less likely we are to participate. And the third and final reason for the crisis of imagination is that, in some ways, we humans have become victims of our own success. As we've explored more of the physical world, pretty much most of the world's surface, other planets, and made huge, huge advancements in technology, science, and medicine, it's come with this underlying belief that there's nothing left to imagine, explore, or create. If any of you have played video games, it's similar to the feeling you get if you've completed the map and you've completed all the levels and you're now just wandering around aimlessly. But this would only be true if there was only one reality, a physical reality. But as we've already established, there are two realities. There is the physical reality, but there's also the imagined reality. And thanks to the imagined reality, we are only limited by our ability to imagine. If we can imagine it, then we can create it. Because imagination creates reality. So why do we have a crisis of imagination? We've already established the reasons for the crisis, but how can we harness the power of human imagination? How can we make sure we can collectively imagine new possibilities and a new future? The first thing we need is a beginner's mindset. A beginner's mindset is a state of openness, free from any preconceived notions or limitations. And here I want to share a story with you. When I was 24 years old, I randomly stumbled into the world of media and marketing, and I had no idea what the industry did. But pretty soon I realized that there were thousands of really smart people spending millions of pounds to create these marketing campaigns to sell more products and services. But they weren't really involving communities and young people in the process. And the question I asked was, what if we involved young people in the creative and decision-making process so that they can shape the world that they want to see? But that wasn't how the industry did things. And that is the benefit of a beginner's mind. Because I didn't know how things were done, I was able to imagine new realities. 2 years later, I started my own company called The People, with that very mission to amplify the voices of young people and underserved communities, making sure that young people are participating and co-creating the future. And the reason I share this story with you today is that The People didn't exist in the physical world. It was only a figment of my imagination. We had no funding, we had no clients, I had no previous experience starting a business. But 5 years later, working with some amazing people and partners, we've been able to support more than 1,000 young people from all around the world with mentoring, job opportunities, and creative projects working with some of the world's biggest brands. Imagination creates reality. I'm sure all of you sitting here today, you've had ideas, projects, and passions that didn't exist in the physical world, but somehow, through the power of imagination, you've been able to bring it to life. The second way we can harness the power of human imagination is by challenging the norm. A great example of this is the Fridays for Future movement, which started when a 15-year-old girl decided that she was going to protest outside of the Swedish parliament because she had enough of politicians not taking climate change seriously. And it's important to remember, this was just a solo protester holding a cardboard sign that said "School strikes for climate." At the time, the norm was to go to school. If you were a child or a teenager, you would go to school. And not going to school was actually against the Swedish law. But this young girl decided that she was going to challenge the norm because she believed in something bigger and more important. And even though she was one person, eventually she was joined by her friends and her family, and there was 4 or 5 of them. And then her school friends joined, and there was 20 of them. And before you know it, there was 100 kids skipping school to protest. And as a result of that, this captured the media's attention, and they decided to interview this young girl. And her name was Greta Thunberg, and Greta was able to share her mission with the world. Fast forward to now, Fridays for Future has mobilized more than 3.8 million people, including the biggest climate protests in human history. According to studies, 30% of people in Switzerland have changed their daily habits because of Fridays for Future. Don't ask me why Switzerland, that's just what they told me. And the third way, so we've talked about the first and second way we can harness the power of human imagination. So the first is the beginner's mindset. The second is about challenging the norm. And the third is embracing play. Again, when we are kids, we love to play. We can't stop playing. I remember when I was a kid, I would just be out all the time in the playground, out in the streets, and I'd be forced to come back in to have food or go to sleep, basically. But we all love to play, but at some point we stop playing, unless we're forced to by our children or our siblings. In 1992, a group of 3 young men in jumpsuits performed at a music event on South Korean TV. The group were called Seotaji and Boys, and they were pretty much tired of hearing the same old songs and tracks of pop ballads and trot music dominating the South Korean music charts. So they decided to experiment and play with different sounds, like heavy metal, R&B, and hip-hop. They even included socially conscious lyrics into their music, which was previously unheard of in South Korea. This was a time where music was still under restrictions and censorship. When the group, Seotaji and Boys, performed their song, I Know, live on South Korean TV, they received the lowest score of the competition, and they were heavily criticized by the judges. But they also gave birth to a new genre of music called K-pop, which has since become a cultural phenomenon. As we stand here today, most of our biggest problems are not economic, political, or environmental. They come from a crisis of imagination. And my invitation to you all today is, what if we didn't view the world as physical, fixed, and static, like a rock? What if we viewed the world like Play-Doh? Because we all have the power to shape the physical world using our imaginations. Thank you.